In American society, money is a taboo topic. We're taught at a young age it's improper to talk about it, but we're also bombarded with messages about the power and importance of money in our everyday lives. And by not talking about it, we miss out on the skills and lessons we need to effectively understand and financially plan. That changes today. Welcome to Money Tales. Hosted by Sandy Brager and Cami Doder, Money Tales brings more than 35 years of combined professional experience in personal finance to demystify money and demonstrate what it's like to speak openly about personal financial matters. Join us each episode as they interview modern-day movers and shakers about how money decisions intertwine with their daily lives in order to give you better insight into productive financial conversations. Subscribe today and register for our blog Fathom at aspiriant.com/podcasts to increase your money mojo. And now, here's Cami and Sandy.
Amanda Heyman is our guest this week on Money Tales. Amanda went from journalism to a career in law, driven by a mission to serve the public interest and champion social justice. Then, life took a surprising turn when she and her husband saw a golden opportunity in fantasy soccer. Moving to a venture-backed business focused on growth and profit was a major pivot. Together, they co-founded Starting 11, a fantasy sports app that combined her husband's 30,000-hour passion for fantasy sports with Amanda's network and startup savvy. But stepping into the world of capitalism brought new challenges, like pitching for venture capital, raising funds, and weighing their financial goals against their principles. Amanda shares how she navigated this shift in mindset, balanced personal values with business ambition, and manage the unique pressures of being in business with her husband. Today, Amanda is co-founder and managing partner of Tundra Ventures, a pre-seed venture fund investing in companies focused on health, wealth, and resilience solutions. Prior to founding Tundra, Amanda spent 4 years as a founding partner at Lunar Startups, a Twin Cities-based accelerator designed to supercharge high-potential startup companies founded by diverse CEOs.
Here are 3 key money topics Amanda hits on in this conversation. First, why she passed on the Ivies to attend the University of Michigan Law School. Second, how in venture capital fundraising, your pitch deck is your calling card. Be sure to make it shine. And third, how business finances don't need to be scary. They're a tool. Get curious about your numbers and let them guide your decisions with confidence. Please share this episode with a friend. Now on to our conversation with Amanda Heyman.
Welcome to the Money Tales podcast. I'm Cami Doder.
And I'm Sandy Brager.
Sandy, I'm just back from a weekend away with girlfriends that I've known since elementary school.
Oh, how fun.
It's so special. And this is now becoming an annual, I think. It started last year. It was so special because it feels like their parents were my second and third parents. So we know each other well. And this time, what was really special when I think of Money Tales is on our last morning, we're having coffee and we started talking money.
Did you start the conversation, Cami?
Sandy, I didn't. That's what's so cool. I didn't. But I, of course, leaned in and encouraged and cheered along the way. So at this point, it's 3 of us sitting outside, having our coffee. And one of my friends, she and her husband are newly retired. And so she was talking about how her husband was really encouraging her to own their finances instead of relying on someone knowing everything, their advisor, that she's super smart. And it doesn't mean she shouldn't have an advisor, but make sure she feels really good and she's got all the answers that she needs. All the questions are being answered. Why he was encouraging it is she was sort of downplaying her knowledge. And he said, no, you're really good at this. And so as a result, now they're leaning in and they're actually learning. They've gone to a few retirement seminars and just learning and absorbing. And I loved it. Her comment was just really enjoying the process.
Oh, that's wonderful. It's nice that they decided to do it together.
And then my other friend, she lost her husband. He passed away from cancer when she had 3 relatively young children. And she told the story about having her tribe around her, that her husband set up their family to have advisors to support her so she could focus on all the energy and time that goes into raising children. And now that the kids are kind of shipped, she's ready to take back that control. And I loved that. She was leaning in, saying, I want to understand more.
Oh, that's so great. And just while you're outside drinking coffee.
And I'll say one thing that she referenced, that one of their advisors was calling about 2 different investments and which one would she prefer. I had to remind her that you don't need to be so technical and know all the underpinnings of one investment or another. You ask questions, but that doesn't mean if she didn't have an opinion, she's not financially astute. And that was a nice thing to talk about.
Sounds like you guys had a very productive time together.
Very productive and fun.
I'm glad to hear that, Cammie.
Well, it's my pleasure to pivot our conversation and welcome Amanda Heyman to the Money Tales podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Amanda, would you introduce yourself and share a couple pivotal moments in your life that really impacted who you are today?
I moved to the Minneapolis suburbs from the Washington, D.C. area when I was in 2nd grade. And we were just the weird East Coast outsiders in the neighborhood. We were short, we were loud, we were always laughing about something. We didn't go to church. My dad didn't care about our lawn. We were surrounded by these tall, reserved, church-going Minnesotans from a long line of Scandinavians. Wonderful people, had ride-on lawnmowers, had wood chippers. It was very obvious that we were different. But my family vibe was very much about embracing the weird. We were not trying to fit in. We were owning it. And I mention that because I think the through line to my career has really been working with and on behalf of folks who don't quite fit the mold, who are different in some meaningful way from those who are more traditionally in power. And my goal has been to help those folks and myself be more equal in power. I started my career as a journalist, as a City Hall beat reporter in a small town called Espanola, New Mexico, uncovering political corruption, keeping the city honest. But while I was there, I noticed that we were constantly hiring lawyers to help us basically get information from the city and do other things. There was an antagonistic relationship between the paper and the city and the county. And so I was like, okay, well, I should go to law school. I would love to have the journalistic chops and the legal experience and the law license to do that. So I went to law school in Michigan, wanted to do environmental justice work. That was kind of my plan. I had no interest in money or business. I was like, that's bad and wrong. I'm going to do the social justice work. So I went to law school. I did a couple federal clerkships with 2 different judges in the District of Minnesota. And then I got my first public interest law job at a national nonprofit law center called Farmers Legal Action Group. So I really started out my career working with farmers, original entrepreneurs, which I didn't think about at the time. So we worked on behalf of, for example, Hmong farmers in Minnesota and Wisconsin who were farming unusual crops like ginseng and had trouble getting crop insurance and accessing the federal farm programs. And from there, a colleague and I decided to start our own law firm. We really wanted to work up the value chain. So not just with farmers, but also with food businesses and others who are a little further outside the farm gate. And that was about 11, 12 years ago. While I was doing that, I just have always had an open-mindedness about where projects might take me. So I ended up working for the United Nations as a legal expert on organic markets in Mauritius. I worked as a fellow for the Vermont Center for Ag or the Vermont Law School, I should say, Center for Ag and Food Systems. So I was really deep into that world. What I learned over that time was that I was way more interested in building the business than just doing the legal work for other folks. And so I did a hard pivot alongside my husband and some other co-founders. We started a daily fantasy soccer company. I played soccer for 20 years. My role was really as the catalyst to bring us from zero to Series A. We succeeded in that, raised funding all along the line from friends and family to angel investors to venture capital. And once we achieved that milestone, I was kind of looking around for what my next thing was and had the pleasure of meeting my now Tundra Ventures co-founder, Danielle Steer, and we co-founded Minnesota's first inclusive startup accelerator called Lunar Startups in Minneapolis, St. Paul. We worked with founders who were in software, healthcare, and CPG, and who had CEOs who identified as women, people of color, LGBTQ, and non-binary. And we put about 77 companies through the accelerator over 4 years. And that was what inspired us to start Tundra Ventures. We just saw the incredible talent with folks, again, who don't look like Mark Zuckerberg, really where there was a market dislocation. The money is not flowing to the best talent. And so we thought we could be part of that. And that's what led us to start Tundra Ventures. And we invest in companies that make the 99% healthier, wealthier, and more resilient. Here we are. And I now live in the Bay Area. So it's a whole thing.
And you are in the money business now. Tell us, Amanda, as you and your family, when you were younger, embraced the weird. I love that. When and how did you start learning about money?
One of my core memories is that we actually moved to Minnesota because my dad was helping a friend start a healthcare startup in software, which again, didn't register as a child. And they would always talk about how we were on austerity. So it was like we were on an austerity plan because my dad was helping start this company. My mom was staying at home at the time. I remember that. And we had one of those giant wooden brake fronts that I think they inherited unwillingly, maybe from my grandmother. And we had an envelope in there because my parents are really big into camping. We used to go to the Boundary Waters up in northern Minnesota when I was a kid, and they wanted a new tent. And so we had an envelope in there that had cash in it that they were putting money into to save up for like a really nice new tent that didn't have duct tape on it so that we could go to the Boundary Waters and not get rained out.
So what did this austerity measure childhood feel like to you? What messages did it imprint on you? And how long did it last?
I don't remember anyone declaring it over. I also don't remember feeling deprived. I remember my dad always complaining about how much every year varsity soccer sweatshirts cost. This is ridiculous that it costs $75 to get like the embroidered sweatshirt with your high school and whatever. But I always had everything that I needed. What it brought forward later in life was the idea of safety and the idea of austerity. Like if you were living your life in a way where you could cut back and still be okay, you were fine. And we actually did that when my husband and I and our co-founders started our company. We were on our own austerity plan that we self-imposed on ourselves.
And just out of curiosity, do you guys have children who are also hearing that campaign?
I kind of wish that my daughter had been older during that time because we are not on austerity anymore. And I think it would have benefited her to have a little bit more of a memory of that, especially now that we live in the Bay Area where there's just so much wealth and it's just so different.
It is so different. You leaving this austerity upbringing, or at least this underpinning, and you go to school and you start your career. Tell us about how money played a part in that. Were you thinking about it? Was that something that you were trying to amass, or how did you think about it?
Not at all, especially out of undergrad. So I went to school at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I wanted a journalism job. I went on journalismjobs.com, and I found myself a job in New Mexico. I was deciding between a job that paid $20,000 a year and one that paid $15,000 a year in Pocatello, Idaho. Did not have a lot of money. I remember getting a raise to $25,000, and that was incredible. I wasn't thinking about it that way, but I was always focused on not being in debt. That was a big deal to me. So I was set up with my now husband by a friend. We met at a Halloween party in Chicago, and I was living in New Mexico and he was living in Wisconsin, and we decided to move to Boston. His twin sister was going to school there. I had a good friend there. My next job, I think it made something like $37,000. And I had a little bit of credit card debt from like flying us back and forth to see each other. And that was like my main goal. Oh my God, I'm making so much money now. I can pay off this credit card and make sure it's at zero. And at the same time, when I was living in Boston, my husband and I were actually applying to all the same law schools together. I got into the University of Michigan Law School and they gave me a full ride. And even though I had gotten into schools that were higher ranked than that, Michigan's a good law school, top 10. I got into schools that were higher ranked than that, but without a full ride. And I just intuitively, full body knew I had to take that scholarship, even though a lot of people thought I was crazy. Why wouldn't you go to Harvard Law School or whatever when you could? I didn't want that debt. I wanted the freedom. I didn't want to have to work at a big law firm if I didn't want to. I wanted the law degree, but not being corralled into one pathway. Thank you, 23-year-old Amanda. I'm so glad I didn't have 250, 300K worth of law school debt, especially since I graduated into the Great Recession. So that was definitely lucky.
Amanda, this is pretty fascinating because it does sound like you were starting your career life and adventure as a non-capitalist.
Yes, 100%.
You were focused on social justice and environmental justice. Did your husband end up going to the same law school as you?
We both went to the University of Michigan, graduated, and then we had a deal that we would apply to all of the federal clerkships in all the states we were willing to live in, and whoever got one first would take it and the other one would get a job. So I got one first in Minnesota, and that's how we went back to Minnesota.
Were you guys married at the time?
We were engaged. We took the bar exam and then got married like 2 weeks later.
It sounds like you were having some very upfront money conversations because you're making all these big, powerful life decisions together that have lots of money tentacles flowing through them.
Absolutely. And I know for sure, if I had taken on all that debt, I would have been obsessive about paying it off. And I would have said, like, I need to take the job that allows me to do that. And instead, I was able to be a lot more free. My husband has much more of an abundance mindset when it comes to money. He was like, well, I'm going to be a big law firm lawyer or whatever. I'm going to make a bunch of money. And so I'm not going to worry about it. Where I would have been like, we will be tracking every cent until I pay that off.
Amanda, debt is interesting. For you, it's sounding like debt is not anything you want.
I think I got part of that from my grandmother. We lived through the Depression. She would always save little bits of food, like in aluminum foil in the freezer, that would never, ever be eaten again. You had to save it. And I remember the thing she was most excited about that I ever did was to go to law school for free, not to go to a good law school, to go to law school for free. The idea of debt was just like, no, thanks. I would like to avoid that because I think it was, for me, less about debt and more about freedom.
So you're focused on your freedom. Your husband wasn't worried about those things. He was ready to dive into capitalism. You kind of go your separate ways professionally, but you come together around soccer.
For him, it was really much more about fantasy sports. The Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours. He's like 30,000 hours in on fantasy football. And so that was how it came to be. And then we saw this opportunity in soccer, which there are folks playing fantasy competitions like on Reddit because there was no mechanism to do it back then. And so we thought, oh, we'll go this route and give it a shot.
What a brilliant idea. Tell us a little bit more about how you went about building this business.
So it's called Starting 11. It was myself and my husband, and then one of his law firm colleagues, who's also a huge soccer fan. I was interested in playing soccer. He was more interested in watching soccer. We came together. For me, it was an experiment. I'd never done anything that didn't have a public interest angle to it. My law firm, we were a private public interest law firm. And I think really it was actually prior to starting the fantasy soccer company, it was running that business that really taught me to focus more on the financial piece of it, what my time was worth, and what was really important as far as the brass tacks of running a business and making money.
How did you reach those conclusions and how did you do it in a collaborative way?
I had the network. I had the startup network in town because I had been working in that space for a few years by then. It was just really clear that the goal was you have to raise money or die. In contrast to a law firm, which is a service business, was always focused on being profitable and getting clients. This is a venture-backed business. Our goal is global domination in a non-evil way. That's what we used to say. We have to just raise money to survive. My husband is very much more willing to raise money from friends and family, where I was like, ooh, I don't want to get into that. I would rather raise money from like local angel investors. We won some startup competition, prize money. This is the name of the game. This is what we're doing. And if we can't get enough money to fund it, then we're out.
But you did.
We did.
And what did you learn kind of being in, it sounds like the driver's seat for the first time, actually raising money, because you've been around that, but you hadn't actually done it yourself. What are some of the things that you learned from that experience?
One of the biggest takeaways is around crafting a pitch. I luckily have a wonderful friend, Julie Kusinski, who runs a company called Pitchwell, and she is just like a branding, marketing, messaging genius. And so she helped us a lot. It's such a big difference raising money from folks who know you versus folks who are strangers to you. Getting over that hump was really a big learning, like how you have to go from the horrific pitch deck that we had at the beginning. That was 48 pages. Like, we're all lawyers. So like, it's the worst. You want to have the evidence and the receipts to back it up. to going to these, beautiful slides with photo backgrounds and just the most specific information, and also to really put yourselves in the shoes of an investor. What do they care about? They don't really care about maybe the intricacies of the product. They care about what could the exit be at the end of the day. And so really figuring out what that messaging was, that enabled us to attract a big venture investor called Brand Capital and raise those venture dollars.
And you were able to successfully transition that business.
We raised our Series A round and I was like, okay, cool. I succeeded in my goal to the point of being an outsider. I was in these giant event spaces with a ton of bros and there would be like 3 women. That was not really what I wanted to be doing. Intentionally, like everybody knew that was my role, was the catalyst. And once we got there, then I was going to step back, obviously still being supportive and helpful when needed. But we did that successfully, brought actually most of our efforts toward India because Brand Capital is the venture arm of the Times Group of India, pivoted that way, and then had a whole bunch of really cool things set up. And then COVID hit, everything shut down, soccer shut down. My husband was set to go to India in April of 2020, all collapsed. And so that was the beginning of the end there.
Oh, man.
Bummer.
Though you learned so much. A lot of this learning, maybe all of the learning, came into Tundra Ventures. Tell us, how are you taking what you learned through that process? I love how even you talked about the pitch deck, and you're applying it for the work you're doing with Tundra and for your entrepreneurs you're funding.
2 main ways come to mind. One is I am very much a minimalist when it comes to my space, but when it comes to information, I'm like a little hoarder, like a little squirrel. The entire time while I was doing it, because I knew that I was there for the short term, I was just collecting all the information and learnings because I wanted to do something with it later. I wasn't really sure what, but prior to joining the team, I had been sussing out whether I wanted to do something more for folks who really needed legal and financial information but couldn't afford it, or they didn't have a neighbor who was a lawyer or a mom who was a CFO. And so I was really kind of hoarding all that information for whatever my next thing was. And also having that experience just brings enormous founder empathy. You just really get it. And all of us at Tundra have all been founders in our own ways. And the companies and the founders who we talk with, they immediately know we get it. A lot of times, if you're a VC, you're at a big venture firm, you were an analyst, you have an MBA, but you weren't on the ground scraping and clawing, trying to build your company from nothing to whatever it could be. And so I think that founder empathy is huge. Plus the entire store of information. So while I was at Lunar Startups, the accelerator that we founded before Tundra, created a digital platform with educational tools and templates and a whole system of milestones that we have folks measure themselves against, figure out where the gaps are, and can quickly and efficiently fill them to really avoid those avoidable mistakes that you just hear about time and time again from folks who just haven't done it before. So how would you know?
Amanda, I'm curious, if you look back on your life and if you could go back in time to the young woman who is starting her career in journalism and talk to her today, what would she say in response to the trajectory of your life?
It's really been very opportunistic. What is the next right thing or whatever? And just really being open and interested in whatever comes next. The thing about being a newspaper reporter is you really have to be curious about how things work. You have to really want to know the nitty gritty, unsexy details of the city council's budget. And I think that's the same for owning a business or being a venture capitalist. Like you really have to understand how all of that works. So I think she would be like, well, that's weird and unexpected, but I can kind of see how we got there.
Just from your reflection, it's obvious that you've really just been building on your experience, like all of us do. We have these different experiences, we get new information, we apply it differently. You've built on all of that over time. You bring it to Tundra Ventures. How has your money conversation changed as a result of flipping from once being the person who was raising capital for her own business with partners to one that is now raising capital and investing it in other businesses?
I think it's just the numbers get a lot bigger. Going from like an austerity mindset to a venture mindset, you just realize the scale of what's possible. Also, how much money you actually need to run a business, especially if your revenue is minimal. If you're a normal person, you're like, $25,000 is a lot of money. And it is. But if you're an venture, it's like, oh my gosh, a $10 million fund is a tiny, tiny little drop of the bucket. So I think it's just seeing the difference that larger dollar amounts can make and not necessarily demonizing it and saying, yeah, it can be used for really bad purposes, obviously, but there's certainly a lot of good that can be done if the right folks are funded with a significant amount of money.
How do you balance the right thing that's being done with the dollars and the return on dollars that are possible? Because it sounds like that balance is really important to you. And I know sometimes people can look at a business and think, oh my gosh, it's so easy to turn that business into a much larger multiple of it, but that wouldn't necessarily create any good in the world. But they could be seduced by the return opportunity. You're saying that you're trying to balance the two. And I'm just curious how you go about doing that.
We're looking at a double bottom line. We're first returns focused because we're managing other people's money who want a return. They want a return both in terms, I think, of social capital and financial capital. Primarily, our fiduciary duty is to try to make them more money. And then we have a whole nother lens. We first have to make sure 100% we believe this company could be $1 billion company. It could return our fund. And then we have another layer of, okay, what is this doing for the world? The way that we have come to really think about it is linking our three verticals, health, wealth, and resilience, with social determinants of health. There's, I think, 6 social determinants, but we focus on 3: access to healthcare, economic stability, and neighborhood and built environment. That's the way that we're combining it. We want to make sure that we're investing in these companies at the earliest stages that an institutional investor will write a check. And we're going to be with them for at least 10 years. And we're going to be doing a lot of work for them for pretty much $0. We have to make sure, at least I want to make sure for myself, that I feel great about putting in that effort. For example, one of our companies is a tree-free paper company called Bim Bamboo. And their entire goal is to have a US-based, vertically integrated system where fibers like bamboo or hemp grown in the US can replace every single cardboard box that you get from Amazon can be made out of those kind of fibers instead of out of trees. I can get behind that for the next decade of my existence or more.
I love that. A lot of what we're talking about with you is around financial literacy and your journey in financial literacy. And we talk a lot about in Money Tales. And you mentioned Lunar Startups. You have a lot of content that's geared towards financial literacy. And I'm curious, as you talk to these founders who quite often have passion, they have an idea, but might not have a good baseline, how do you work with them to bring them up to speed? Because they also have to be financially literate also.
I think it's just making it less scary has been sort of my approach. A lot of times, like you're saying, folks are really great at sales and marketing, or they're amazing with their product, but the financial piece feels bad and uncomfortable. And the legal piece feels really bad and uncomfortable because you're paying so much money for somebody to deal with that. And so I think it's just surfacing it in a way. And I actually had to sort of really step into other people's shoes for that, because what makes me feel more safe running a business, or even my family, is knowing exactly what the numbers are. But most people are the opposite. They'd much rather not know and see what happens. And so my message is, hey, it's not scary. Let's just live in reality together. Let's have a spreadsheet. I love spreadsheets. Other people don't. And let's track everything and just set up a simple way that you can track your numbers or your KPIs or whatever you're tracking going forward to know, are you successful from a monetary standpoint? Because I think a lot of the folks I've worked with, they do want to do good in the world. And so they're focusing more on that because it feels more comfortable to them than on the revenue numbers. You can't be a sustainable business owner and have a sustainable business if you yourself are not making enough money. And I've just worked with so many, especially women, who like aren't paying themselves, but are paying their employees and are really focused on the other externalities that are going on with the business that are positive. Awesome. And you want to celebrate those. If you're running a business, the clear sign of whether it's working is, are you bringing in money? That's just a truth that a lot of people hide from. I've just been working with folks to be like, it's okay. let's see what it is. And you're not running a nonprofit, you're running a business. And if it's not making money, it's okay to not do it anymore or to do something else.
Pivot.
Yeah, absolutely.
I appreciate that you're making spreadsheets fun again, Amanda.
I don't know if I am, but I'm having fun.
Tell us, what's your next money conversation going to be, and who's it going to be with?
It is going to be with my 10-year-old daughter, Caroline. She is engaging in her first entrepreneurial experience. I was not involved in any way. She's going to be selling bracelets as a vendor in the town's children's holiday fair. So she's making all these different kind of bracelets. I was like, so here's what we're going to do.
Here's the spreadsheet.
I'm going to show you this thing called Google Sheets.
Oh, I was kidding. You're right. I love it.
No, for real. We are going to make a profit and loss statement, and we're going to track how much did the beads cost. My husband and I pay for it, but how much did it cost? Because she has to figure out a price. How many bracelets of each kind you have to sell. And so we are scheduled to go back and revisit that conversation.
It's really cool. You're bringing it to life and making it real, and that learning is priceless. These girlfriends and I talked about how our parents maybe didn't do enough of that.
Especially for women. I want to teach all the young girl children, right, or non-binary children to be okay with it.
You said not make it scary. What a great word.
Yeah, not make it scary. And I also have my little girl on green light. I don't know if y'all are familiar with that. It's really cool because you can get in there. She's invested in Disney and Netflix, all the things she likes. But it has education, and she will have had that from a young age, and I think feel more comfortable with it. And I wish that for as many people as possible.
Amanda, what a great conversation has this been with you on Money Tales.
Where can our listeners find you?
I am on LinkedIn, I think the most these days. So just Amanda Heyman on LinkedIn. And I actually try to stay off social media, but I do have a blog at amandaheyman.com.
Oh, Amanda, thanks for joining us on Money Tales.
Thanks for having me. It's been great.
Thanks for listening to the Money Tales podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, share it with someone you think would benefit from listening. And leave us a review on your favorite podcasting platform. Your ratings and reviews help more people find our podcast. If you're inspired to gain clarity and peace of mind about financial matters, don't hesitate to reach out to our team at Aspiriant. Go to aspiriant.com/start a dialogue. Or you can email Sandy and me at podcasts@aspiriant.com. See you next time.